there's a kind of a lot in here. And basically we're using the Brahma-Viharas, the divine abodes, we're delving into those as meditation techniques, but also using them as a framework for self-exploration. So when you're working with the Brahma-Viharas, which are, loving-kindness, goodwill, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. When you're working with these in meditation, a lot of stuff comes up. And I've recognized this over the course of a number of years in my own practice and with what people have said to me. And so when we decided we were going to do a Brahma-Viharas retreat, I wanted to have kind of a process for dealing with this stuff that came up. So as you all know, there's this sort of mindfulness movement happening in Western culture right now, where people are taking basically Buddhist practices and putting them into secular settings, hospital pain management programs and psychotherapeutic programs and stuff like that, working with things like mindfulness, almost transporting them directly out of Buddhist practice into these other settings. And this has resulted in some kind of interesting stuff. Working with mindfulness meditation just as a stress reduction process and that sort of thing. And so now you're seeing things like Google Search Inside Yourself program, which is mindfulness-based emotional intelligence. Yeah, I know, it's clever. And I just did the first of our Path of Freedom programs at Tomoka Correctional Institution, which is mindfulness-based emotional intelligence for inmates and at-risk youth and that sort of thing. So the concept of mindfulness as we encounter it in these kinds of settings usually has a fairly narrow meaning, but as we encounter the concept of mindfulness in the course of Buddhism and the Dharma and the way Buddha talked about it, it really encompasses a lot of different stuff. And so we're going to work with mindfulness still, but we're going to work with it in ways that you might not encounter it all that often in some of these other programs. Now, just as Buddhist practice has influenced contemporary psychology, there's some tools that can be used really to kind of deepen your spiritual practice. And so this is part of what I started working with this particular program, is taking some things that are out there and using them as sort of spiritual tools. So, and some of these things are in use in psychology, but they came out of Buddhism and then went into psychology, and now we're bringing them back as spiritual practices. So, for example, there's Nikon, which is related to Shin Buddhism. It was developed in around 1900 to 1910, somewhere in there, by a Jodo Shinshu practitioner, and it's been used in Japanese psychotherapy, and now we're sort of re-importing it back into Buddhist practice. And there's a guy named Shoma Morita, who is a Japanese psychotherapist who came up with this whole approach to living called Constructive Living. And it's based very much on Zen, and the way Zen encourages working with your attention in daily life and how you act within the context of the way you feel in reality. And then there's rational emotive behavior therapy, which comes out of Western psychology. Back in around 1989 or so, I was sitting with a Zen group in Orlando, and I was also working with a rational recovery group, which basically uses rational emotive behavior therapy as a way to deal with recovery from addictions and alcoholism and stuff. Anyway, and as I was doing this, I was sitting with this Zen group, and I was reading about rational emotive behavior therapy, and I was working with a mentor, and I kept encountering things in REBT that sounded like they came right out of the Zen playbook, right out of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind or something. And so I thought, wow, this really kind of opens up my understanding of a lot of Zen things by looking at this. So what we've come up with is this sort of approach to taking these things and using them as adjuncts to working with the Brahma-Viharas, to just give ourselves a lot more tools to apply to our work and our self-exploration. So it's kind of nice that we're going to be doing this fairly slowly. We'll be doing it over the course of March and April. So you'll get a chance to work with different meditations for a period of time. What we're basically going to do is our meetings will have a Dharma talk the way they always do, but it'll be geared toward this particular work that we're doing. And we'll try to structure those talks so that if a newcomer comes in, they won't be completely lost. And if you don't follow each and every one, you're not going to come in and be lost. I mean, these topics are fairly self-contained. So there'll be talks, there'll be meditations, and sometimes guided, and sometimes I'll just give you an instruction to work with. There are, on our website, there are downloadable MP3s of all the meditation practices that you can use as guided meditations. And there'll be some journaling that you can do. So there'll be some exercises. And we'll work with the Nikon. I don't like to say Nikon because it sounds like the camera and it's spelled like Nikon, but yeah, it's Nikon, N-A-I-K-A-N. We'll do some Nikon work as a group, and we'll actually do some sort of Nikon reporting to one another. But don't worry about that. That's a few weeks down the road, and you'll be prepared for it when the time comes. So there's a workbook that you can order if you'd like. A print copy, you can order it from Amazon. You can order. There's a link on our website to the publisher's page, and it's Loving Heart, Peaceful Mind Workbook. The PDF is also on our website, so you can just, if you don't want to buy the workbook, you can just download it. And there's also worksheets for the journaling and stuff that are there for you to pop open and use. So you don't have to buy anything if you don't want to. And you don't have to do this whole thing. Do whatever you're available to. It'll be online and in video, and have the resources there for you to come back to. What I found when I've done this before is that everybody takes something away from the process, but everybody takes something different away from the process. When I did it the first time in Daytona Beach, we put up a survey, monkey survey, and I asked people, what part did you like and what part did you not like? And one person would say, well, I really love the Rational Buddhism stuff, I didn't like the Nikon stuff. And somebody else would say exactly the opposite of that. And somebody liked the meditation. So work with it, and keep coming back to it if you want to, because you'll find that there's a lot of good stuff in there, but there's a lot of stuff in there. And so even though it's going to take us 2 months to get through it all, it's really just kind of scratching the surface as far as the skills available for you to learn. So a couple of guidelines. I mean, we're going to talk about things as they come up in here, and as we do this, there's liable to be some kind of deep personal things happen. And so I hope we can all agree that whatever happens in here is confidential. Now, we're here to support one another. So, we should feel comfortable talking in this setting about whatever comes up. I'm going to give you 3 options as to how to ask questions. The best way is during the discussion period, if you've got a question, ask it. Because then everybody's going to hear the question. Other people are going to have the same question and be happy that you asked it. But your second choice, we'll have some index cards and stuff scattered around. You can write a question down and submit it. So we'll have somebody, Michelle or someone, that you can hand those to, and they'll just hand them to me so nobody will know who asked it. And then the final thing is, if you want to, you're always welcome to talk to me or talk to Sensei Michelle if you'd rather, privately about these things. We're always pretty accessible. So, but again, if you're thinking a question is dumb or too self-revealing or whatever, then that means you really should ask that question, because 10 other people are sitting there going, I have this question and it's too dumb or too self-revealing. Okay. So the overall process of this, we're going to work a lot with meditation. And so I want to talk a little bit about meditation in this context. Meditation is kind of a two-part process. And one part has to do with cultivating, and one part has to do with letting go. So we're going to cultivate skillful states of mind, and we're going to work on letting go of patterns of thought and behavior that kind of keep us stuck in our patterns of stress. You're going to find, I hope, if this works well, you're going to find that you're clinging to some ideas that you really want to hold on to, but that are really causing you a lot of trouble. Okay? And sometimes these things come up while you're trying to cultivate more skillful intentions. So we're always going to open the meetings with the service like we did tonight. And as you're doing that, this is a really good time to think about what that means. When we're offering incense, when we're offering flowers, things like that, what are you doing? You're giving something. And I know I didn't make you go out and buy the incense, but you make offerings buy incense. And so when it gets lit, it's yours. You're giving something up which is going to transcend its original shape to become smoke, and then therefore available to all of us. So during those opening chants and the opening offerings, think about that. We always light candles. We're bringing light really to our minds. In the physical world, we see things because there's light there. If there's no light, we couldn't see anything, and we'd just stumble around groping blindly. Spiritually, without the light of wisdom, we're the same way. We're stumbling and groping our way through life. And so wisdom is very important in Buddhism, and candlelight is its symbol. That's why there's a candle on the altar. Wisdom is different from knowledge. Knowledge is important. You get knowledge from doing things like reading books and listening to people like me and all that stuff. But in order to get wisdom, you have to put that into practice. And the wisdom is something that comes from within as a result of you applying knowledge. So a big part of why we do things like meditation retreats and why we're going to do this series is to give you a chance to practice with the knowledge so it becomes part of your wisdom. Flowers, I think flowers are going to probably be a more important symbol than usual during this. Flowers really represent the transience of beauty and kind of the cycle of existence. Those flowers are really pretty right now. About 48 hours from now, they won't be as pretty. About a week from now, they'll be compost. Maybe this time next year, they'll be part of some other bunch of flowers, right? That's the cycle. So really, because of this transience, we can appreciate the beauty of this moment. So think about that when we come in here for these meetings, the importance of this moment, not taking for granted that because this moment's going to be gone. And flowers can remind you of the constant flow of life and to live fully in the time that's available to us. Normally, if we were to go to a meditation retreat, the first thing we'd do is take the precepts. And so that the idea there is you sort of start off with a clear karmic state. And I'm not going to make you take the precepts every week or anything like that. But if you're going to do this whole thing, and if you really want to kind of dig into this practice for the next couple of months, you can take the precepts on your own, or if you want to, come to me and we'll do a ceremony. But or just make this time a time to be a little bit more mindful of the different ways that we cause harm to ourselves and others, and to to work a little bit more diligently to avoid that, to be compassionate for others and also to be compassionate for yourself. So like I said, we're gonna do a lot of meditation in this. Tonight we're going to do one that you've all done before. We're going to do a basic mindfulness of breathing. And not because this is a mindfulness meditation program, it's really not, but it's something that you'll come back to over the course of this. And I want to talk a little bit about meditation in the Buddhist context. The Buddha talked about meditation basically 3 areas: right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. We're going to focus largely on right effort. You can't do right effort without right mindfulness and without right concentration. I mean, these things all work together, so you really can't focus on just one. But we're going to emphasize effort more in some ways than a typical meditation retreat would. So what did the Buddha mean when he said right effort? And basically he meant observing the state of mind that we're in and abandoning unskillful qualities and preventing the arising of unskillful qualities and cultivating skillful qualities and perpetuating skillful qualities that have arisen. And we'll go into a lot more depth about what that means as we go along. But basically, because we're going to be working with things like metta bhavana and stuff, we're focusing on the cultivating side of meditation. Meditation is mindfulness, being aware of what's happening in the present moment. It's concentration, setting our mind on one thing, and it's using effort to work with what comes up in order that we cultivate what we want to have growing in the garden of our mind, and we pull the weeds out, the stuff that we don't want growing there. So, in a way, everything kind of starts with concentration. I brought my jar with me tonight. Ajahn Chah used to carry a jar like this around with him. And it comes in handy sometimes when I'm talking to like college groups and stuff. You know, you got a jar, this is a jar, it's got some sand and rocks and dust and stuff in it. And as long as you keep it agitated, it stays cloudy, right? But as soon as you set it down and leave it, all that stuff starts to settle. So over the course of the time that we sit here talking, that goes from being, you know, muddy water that you can't see through to being pretty clear. You know, over time, finer and finer dust settles out and the water becomes clearer and clearer. So this is what we do when we meditate. When we concentrate, we set our minds on one place. We try to keep our minds there so that all that other stuff that we're normally doing that clouds our mind so that we can't see what's going on clearly can settle. And the mind eventually becomes very clear. And when the mind becomes clear, then that's when we can have insight. We can see what's in there realistically, without filters, without a lot of clouding. As we're doing some of these meditations, we're going to be basically giving ourselves an opportunity to do this to our minds. Because we're going to do some things that almost deliberately will stir up a lot of muck. And then we'll keep our minds set where we want it so that those things will get a chance to settle back down again. When you do that, you find some pretty subtle stuff in there sometimes that you weren't even aware you were working with. So, like I said, we're not going to do anything too new tonight. We're going to start off with a short anapanasati meditation, and those of you, which means mindfulness of breathing. Those of you who haven't done this before, if you want to work on this in the next week, there's one online you can download. So before we meditate, we got a few minutes. Are there any questions? Yes. Yeah. So the question was, what are the 5 precepts? Not to kill. And if you want, you can kind of expand that into general non-harming, right? Not to take what isn't freely given. So basically, don't steal, you know, don't cheat people. I mean, it's a little broader than just not stealing. Not to engage in harmful sexual activity. And if you want, you can expand that to the idea of not engaging in harmful relationships. Not to engage in harmful speech. And generally that would include lying in order to harm someone. It's okay if somebody says, "Do I look okay in this dress?" to say, "Yeah."
I see.
White lie.
The white lie.
Yeah. You don't have to be totally truthful. Just don't lie in order to harm someone or to cover up for a harm that you've done, right? But not to engage in false speech, idle speech, just kind of aimless conversation. Don't do that. And harsh speech. Now look, the idle speech thing, this is a tough one because most of us work at like jobs with other people. And you can't just not talk to people. Somebody says, "So, how was your weekend?" You don't just walk away. Right? So these things are basically guidelines for mindful behavior. They're not hard and fast rules. If you look at formally how a precept is taken, it's "I vow to set my mind on not killing." Would be a fairly straightforward translation of the traditional Pali phrase. So you're saying, okay, so I'm not saying I absolutely will not kill anything because that would be impossible. But you're setting your mind on not killing. And then the last one is to refrain from clouding your minds with intoxicants. Again, these are mindfulness practices, not rules. Okay, so the purpose of, and I haven't done that sort of thing in a long time, but as I understand it, the purpose of doing something like that would not be to cloud your mind, but to open your mind in some way, right? It's part of a religious ritual. So, if you take a cold medicine, that's an intoxicant, but you're not taking it in order to compromise your mindfulness, right? You think about it this way: the first 4 precepts are to prevent you from harming others. You're going to not kill, not steal, not engage in harmful sex, not engage in harmful speech. And then the last one is to help you keep these 4. So one of the ways I put this is not to get so drunk that you forget about the other 4, right? So it doesn't mean, I've got a very good friend who's a very devout Buddhist, and he works as a translator at one of the temples, and he's a doctor, and he thinks it's beneficial to have a glass of wine or 2 every day, and that's okay, because he's not drinking it in order to get plastered and forget his other 4 precepts and behave badly, right? So, again, use these as this time, if you want to take this time as sort of a spiritual retreat. Okay, look at these precepts, look at these ideas and how you live your life, and how can I be less harmful now. And when you find, the beauty of doing something like that is that when you find yourself resisting an idea, like to not harm or to not engage in harmful speech or whatever, now go, okay, so where's the resistance coming from? What am I thinking here? What is the mechanism of resistance that's coming up, and how can I work with that? Because now that's something to work with, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, so it's kind of working with the spirit of renunciation now.